So what we'll be doing today is creating our own time controller script. And what this controller does, it handles anytime the time changes for that game object is on. Um, this will also be able to affect the animations as well. So anytime the game object is sped up or slowed down, the animations will also be sped up and slowed down. As well for anything for rigid bodies or anything that has character controllers, anything um, that's related to time can be used for this time controller script. So let's jump straight in. I created this basic scene here and we're using this cylinder to represent our player. I also moved our main camera onto our cylinder just for a cheap way for the camera to follow our player. I've also created a script called a player movement and I've attached it to this cylinder. And let's quickly take a look. All this player movement script does is simply moves the player uh, in the direction. That's it. Let's take a quick look at the player movement script. So as I already said before, it just allows the player to move in any direction they want, and that's it. Now, some of you may already know about this timescale property that Unity provides. And what this timescale property does, it allows you to slow down time of every object in your scene. Now, this can be a problem if you want to have different objects moving at different rates of time. So you might have the player, for example, moving slightly faster while their enemies moving slower. You can't do this with the timescale property they provide, as this affects everything in your scene. So what we'll be doing today is trying to make our own property that can control individual game objects. So you can have some objects move slower and some objects move faster. So let's create our script and let's call it time controller. Still loading. So the first thing we'll need in the time controller script is the value of the game object or the speed or the time of the game object is moving at. And so if it's at normal speed, we'll need it as at 1. If it's moving at half the speed, it'll be 0.5. And if it's moving at double the speed, it'll be 2. So let's call it time dilation. And let's set it to 1 because that's the default time we want the player to move at, normal time. We also need a way to change this value. All right. We also, oh, sorry, let me just move this, change that to lowercase. We also want to be able to change that time dilation value so that it can change it to be faster or slower. So let's create a new method and let's call it time change. And what this new method does, it takes in a new value, a float to be precise, and let's call it new time dilation. And it simply replaces the current time dilation value. So for example, if the player was to walk over a pickup, the pickup will call this method and it will give a value, let's say 2, and now the time dilation value will be set to 2. Now that the time dilation has changed, we want to let everyone know who cares that the time dilation has changed. Now, in our case, the player movement cares about this new value, the time dilation. It's going to, with that new value, it's going to do some stuff, either slow it down or speed up, depending on what that value is. And I'll show you that in a couple of minutes. But first, we need to get that value from the time controller over to the player movement. And how can we do this? Is by using events. And if you don't know what events are just a nice way of passing information around. So in this case, rather than the player movement constantly asking the time controller, "Hey, has the time dilation has changed?" every frame, we can just say, "Time controller, please let everyone else know that the time dilation changed when it has happened," and it will do that. So let's do that. So let's include the necessary imports. So using system, this is what is needed for the events, and we'll need a public event, uh, event handler, And let's leave this blank for now. Come back to that, and let's call it on time change. Now, the reason why I left this blank is because we need to pass in, we need to pass the new time dilation value to whoever's listening to this event. And to do that, we'll need to create our own parameter or our own arguments to pass. So let's call it on time change args. I know some of these names are a bit confusing, but you can name it anything you want. And let's call this public class and the same name as we got here. And also it needs to inherit from the event args class. So now now we'll be able to pass in our own properties to who to whoever is listening to this time controller. And what I said before, we need to pass in the new time dilation value. So we can call this float new time dilation. And obviously it needs to be public because then no one will be able to access it. Okay, now we need to invoke this event. So what does that essentially mean is just saying, hey, broadcast that the time has changed, and we do that by simply going on time change, that's the name of the event, dot invoke. Also, we need to pass in two parameters. Let's take a quick look. One is the sender and one is the on time change argument. The first thing you can just, for the sender, it really doesn't matter. We don't really care. So I normally just pass in this. For the second parameter, we just need to pass in the new time dilation value. So what do we do here is just new time, on time change arguments, curly brackets, then new time dilation value equal to time dilation. So what we're doing, we're setting this value into here and we're passing this to whoever's listening. And in our case, will be the player movement. So now we can save that. Go over to player movement. Now we obviously need to get a reference to this. So first, let's get an await going. And we need to get the time controller. Now both of them are going to be on the same object. Even though I haven't set it up yet, but both of these are going to be on the same object, on the same level. So let's just go private and let's call it time controller lowercase. Now we need to get a reference to this. So get component and we're gonna call time controller, and that's it. So this gets the reference to it. We also need a start. And what do we need to do? First, we need to actually subscribe to the event. So we do time controller dot on time change, and that's the name of the event. And we need to subscribe by doing plus equals. And this essentially is subscribing to that event we created in the time controller. Now, this needs a method, so let's call it on time dilation change. And close it. And we actually need to create that method. So it's going to be a private void. And let's just copy that. On time dilation change. And it's going to have an object, which is a sender, and it's going to have that the class we created, the nested class we created that holds the arguments. So we time controller dot on time change arguments, and let's just call it e. So right now we are subscribed. So we're subscribed on startup. So Anytime the on time change is called in the time controller, it will also call this method, and this allows us to do quite nice things with it. So we also need a new value, um, which will also be private, and this will be. I know there's a lot of time dilations going on and time change, but yeah, this is also going to be another time dilation. You can call it player time dilation. Doesn't really matter. Time dilation, and we're also going to set this to one. So we want to copy that, and we want to store the new time dilation value when this is called. So this actually changes the time dilation value. Now that we have this time dilation parameter, we're going to be using it in our update. So anytime we change the player's position, we'll also use the time dilation. We'll factor in the time dilation into that. Now, what does that exactly mean? So if you was to time, so right now the time dilation is 1. So if you was to times it by 1, well, it still moves at the same speed, at the same direction. It doesn't matter, right? Anything times by 1 is still the same value it is. And if you was to time something by zero point 0.5, it will be slower. If you was to time something by 2, it would be as twice as fast. So this is how we use the time dilation. This can also be used for rigid bodies. This can also be used for the character controller. It can be used for anything. Animations too. So what you do, you simply just do times time dilation, and that's it. So now, anytime the time dilation is not 1, you will see that it'll move slower or faster. Um, but first, let's just save that and let's set it up. Yep, so let's go to player. Let's just rename this player, and let's add this time controller script. So boom, now he is affected by time using a time controller script. So if, for example, you wanted other objects to be affected, you have to put the time controller script on them. And yep, let's create a new game object, a cube, and let's just quickly rename that to time box. And what this time box does is anytime the player enters this box, it would slow him down. Um, so let's quickly go back to scene. As you can see here, we don't want to see the material. We don't really care about that. So I just disabled it. And let's scale it up. Let's make this is trigger because we want to be able to enter it. And if you add a rigid body, because that's just how collision works, you need one of them needs to have a rigid body for it to detect. So that's fine. Let's make kinematic because we don't want it to move. Um, okay, now we need to add a new component or a new script, and let's call it timebox. And this is the way how we're going to change the time dilation for the player when he enters that. So here we're in timebox, and what we need to do, we need to get rid of everything else. We don't really care about everything else, and we need to make a public variable, um, which is a float, and let's call it time value. Now let's go on trigger enter, and let's do if other dot try get component, and what do we need to pass here, which is a time controller. We're trying to get a time controller, and we're going to pass in a variable. This variable is going to be a time controller. Let's call it TC, and we're going to pass it TC. So we're actually checking to see if the other object we that just intersected with this box is actually has a time controller, and if it does, we're going to do some stuff with that. So what do we need to do? We need to call the time controller change time, which is this. But as you can see, this is private, so we need to set this to public, and we go back. Then let's go time change. Now we need to pass it a value because it's expecting a new time dilation value, and this is that value, time value. Let's just give it a default value of 1. And let's save this and let's move back over. So we've got a time box in front. I'm going to make it probably a bit bigger. And in the box, we want it to set to half its speed because we want to slow it down. And yeah, let's try it. So this is the speed normally, and let's go in the box. You can see it slows down, but you can see now it's slowed down it completely, even when you left the box. You don't want to do that. In this case, you obviously want to at some point reset the timescale back to the default value, which would be 1. Um, but you guys, you can see here, it has slowed it down, but we want to reset it back to 1 again. And we go private uh, void on trigger exit. And now it will be exactly the same thing. So let's just copy that. And instead of passing in time value, we just simply just pass it 1, which is the default value. So now we save that and come back to the editor, play it. Let's turn gizmos on so we can actually see the box. So if you actually walk through it, you can see it. I'm slowed in the box. As soon as I enter, I'm back to normal speed. Slowed, fast. And now you can also change the speed of this. So we can actually change this to 2. Oops, sorry, 2. And now we're much faster. I also quickly want to show you how this can be done using a rigid body. So in your game, you might have some sort of object that's using a rigid body, and you also want to slow it down using that. So in my case, I'll quickly make a bullet that bounces back and forth, and anytime it enters a time box, we'll slow it down or speed it up. Um, so yeah, let's do that right now. So let's create a sphere, and that will be our bullet. We will need to add a rigid body as well. We also need to add a material that allows it to bounce off the wall. So we want it to bounce off these walls. So let's right click, create. It's a physics material. Let's call it bounce. And let's just set this to 0, this to 0, and this to 1. Set the friction combine minimum and bounce combine maximum. Now go back to the bullet. In the rigid body, in the sphere collider, we want to set the physics material to this bounce we just created. So now we actually need to create a bullet script. So let's do that right now. Let's call it bullet, capital B, and let's create an add. So let's add that time controller, and let's call it time control. La. Yep, and we want to get a reference to that in the awake. Get component time controller. Okay, and we also need to subscribe to the time controller like we did before with the player movement. And if you remember that, we would do time controller dot on time change plus equals and a method. Let's call it time change. And rather than writing all of that, it would generate a method for us very quickly. We also need a time dilation value. So it would be a float time dilation, and we set this to 1, so the default, and we set this, time dilation equal to new time dilation. So we change that we change the time dilation. Okay, now we also need to get the rigid body as well. And how we're going to move it is by adding a force. So we will also need a movement speed. move speed. So not sorry, let's call it bullet speed. And let's set this to 20. This will be used to add a force to the bullet, so it will move in the right direction when it first starts. So now we also need to do it for any time the time dilation has changed for the bullet. So we will first need to store the velocity of the bullet. We also want to set the current velocity back to 0. The reason why we set it back to 0 is if we was to add another force to it, it will just add onto the top of that. It won't actually reset it, which we want it to do. And now we actually want to add a force to the rigid body. But first we need to get the velocity direction. So normalize that, times it by the current bullet speed, or the bullet speed, sorry, and by the new time dilation. And we also want to make it force mode impulse, same as before. So as I said before, anything that uses the time mechanic will need the time controller. So we put a time controller. Let's remove gravity because we don't want it to bounce, and let's drag this here like that, and we're just going to bounce here. We also want to get a time box, and I want to flip it 90 degrees and move it here. And yeah, I think that's good. Let's have a little play. As you can see, it's bouncing back and forth and it's slowing down as soon as it enters it. Probably a bit hard to see, but you know what? I can make it easier. As you can see here, it's slowing down as soon as it exits, it goes back to normal speed. Slowing down as soon as it exits, goes back to normal speed. And the player's the same thing. Thanks for watching the video. This is the first of many videos I want to do. So please leave some feedback or anything you want to see in the future. I'll be down for anything. So yeah, take care guys.